Welcome to this episode of the Talent Forge, where we are shaping the future of training and development. Today, we have a really special guest, Kyle McDowell, and I want to say welcome to the show, Kyle.
Jay, man, it's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, Kyle. Okay, so looking at your background, you have some amazing experiences in everything from your speaking to your corporate experience. I'd love for the audience to get to know you just a little bit. Tell me your story. How did you get into this kind of speaking, talent development, workforce development space?
Well, it was never the plan. So I would venture to
So
guess.
often, so often I
So
hear
yeah,
that. I
right.
love it. Yeah.
No surprise, right? We're out of the gate with no surprises, man. I began my career, I think, so no differently than probably every member of your audience, and that is a lot of optimism. I brought a lot of energy and excitement. I was an eager beaver, and I wanted to take on as much as possible and kind of grow and have an impact. I wanted to find fulfillment and have an impact, and I wanted to do big things. And I still remember that very first cubicle I started at in a regional bank, and it's been about 30 years ago. I I plotted my path through corporate America, like many of us, and found myself in bigger and bigger roles and responsibilities. And ultimately, before exiting the corporate world in 2019 to write my book, I led collectively about 30,000 employees in my last two roles. I had multi-billion dollar P&Ls for which I was responsible. But for me, I think that is kind of superficial stuff because I think all of us set out to do, we want to do big things. We want to have an impact. We want to find fulfillment. And I didn't have any of those things the first 20 or so years of my career. I had a lot of accomplishments. I checked a lot of boxes, and from the outside looking in, appeared to be some guy who was, reasonably successful and had achieved a lot of his goals. But what I felt inside was apathy. It was probably around year 22, maybe, that I sensed so much apathy and this overwhelming question of, is there a better way? That I had to look in the mirror. I had to do some really deep self-reflection, and that's what kind of fueled what I'm now calling the second chapter of my career. And I left corporate America in 2019 to write my book, Begin with We. It became a USA Today and Wall Street Journal bestseller. And you mentioned my speaking, so now that's most of my activity is in my work is around speaking at large conferences or even organizations to help them kind of not make the same mistakes that I made and use these principles that I created and that are the foundation for the book to help create what I coined as a culture of excellence, where there's a strong sense of we actually lean into each other, we take care of each other, we actually give a shit about one another, and it's a lot more about relationships and connection than it is results. Because if you have the former, the latter is going to come, and that's what I found.
Oh, I'm loving this. Okay, so let me dig in a couple of things here. Is first of all, you got out of corporate when getting was good in 2019. It was almost maybe you had that predictive capacity of like maybe I should get out of here, but
I
that's
wish.
awesome. So here's
Yeah.
my question. As somebody with my behavioral science background, I study emotions a lot. Apathy is one of those emotions that I think a lot of people have a very difficult time grasping.
Mm.
And they may be because when we feel apathy, it can lead to a number of things. It can lead to us feeling anger. It can lead to us feeling frustrated. It can lead to burnout. It can lead to a number of things. And it can also be the inverse of that, that all of those can lead to apathy. So here's my question for you, Kyle. What was it that sort of gave you an indication like this is apathy? This is, I'm not feeling fulfilled. I don't care. And obviously that's not something that you wanted to be, but
Right.
what was it that was the signal to you that was like, yeah, I'm in an apathetic state at the moment?
Yeah, man, where to begin? For me, there were a couple of things that I just couldn't avoid. The first was my marriage. My marriage was on the brink of a divorce that ultimately came to be, and certainly my work played a huge role in that downfall. I was on the road 3 4 nights a week for about a dozen years, and my work became my identity. I was the
Mm.
same. I carried the same being, for lack of a maybe more scientific expression, inside and outside of work. And everything I did was connected to my work. always on call, always a bit. And that was kind of the nature of the work that I did. I was an operations guy. We ran 24-hour operations around the globe. So, that kind of comes with the territory. But when I realized the impact it was having on my personal life, not just my marriage, my relationships with other loved ones were all being compromised. My health was not good. I wasn't in shape. I didn't. There was always something wrong.
Yeah.
And one day I used to train with this guy, and he said, "Man, I think stress is what's driving your illnesses, your aches, your pains. I think your back is largely related to your stress." And I
Smart
said,
guy.
"Man, you're nuts. You're crazy."
Yeah.
And it turned out to be so. And I tell you, Jay, what is the biggest gut punch of all is when you become apathetic about the very environments that you created. Um, that's a wet blanket. That really was an eye opener
Yeah.
for me. So I started to ask a lot of questions like, is there a better way? Am I the only one that feels this way? And what iced it for me when you ask about, the things that put me in that position, I think ultimately these questions forced me to ask my confidants, people that I really trusted, those that had been with me for at multiple organizations. I had surrounded myself by folks that I really trusted, and it turned out what I thought was respect was actually fear. They feared me.
Mm.
And if you care at all about your brand and your reputation and how people think about you and what they say about you at the dinner table, because let's be honest, if you're in any type of position of authority, and oftentimes even not, those that you work with, they're talking about you at the dinner table. They're telling their significant other what a jerk you
How
were
much
that day.
yeah, my boss. Oh gosh.
Yeah,
Yeah.
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 And it occurred to me when I realized respect was not what I was feeling, and it was more fear. And one person even told me that directly. That's when I started to play out kind of a legacy conversation with myself. It's like, dude, you've been doing this 20 something years. You've checked a lot of boxes. You've accomplished probably more than you've ever dreamt you would, probably making more than you ever thought you would. Is this all there is? Are you meant for more? Is there something else? So I chose to turn that apathy into fuel. And
Hmm.
that's what it compelled me to leave corporate America. I was going to sit on the bench for a little while I figured things out and work through my marriage, which, as I mentioned, didn't work out. And I made a promise to myself after all of these questions and answers that if I were to go back into that fray, I would approach it very, very differently. I didn't know what that meant. I just knew I needed a different recipe because the recipe I had, I knew in and out, backwards and forward, and it drove great results, but it also drove the apathy, and it lacked connection. I didn't really connect with people the way that I could have or should have, didn't have the impact I could have or should have. And I just didn't want to end my career that way. So I stepped away, and it only lasted about 11 days. I got a phone call asking would I be interested to take on a role that was in need of a bit of a cultural transformation. Had about 15,000 employees. It's a $7 billion program, and it was obvious to me very very early on in the interview process that this was what you were asking for. Are you really
Hmm.
going to be that guy? Are you going to be the person that whines about it, or are you going to actually take what you've learned, hang on to some of those good aspects, and find a different way to have a different set of outcomes that leave you connected and a legacy that you can be proud of?
I love that.
Yeah, man. I took the role, and I guess the rest worked out because it was that organization where I created these principles that have changed my life, that compelled me to write the book. They're still in practice at that organization. I've deployed them at multiple organizations since then. And it's just, but I have to say, all of that started with the apathy that drove the self reflection that caused me to really test myself. Are you going to keep your head down and keep plugging along like you did the last 20 years, like so many of us do? Or are you
Hmm.
going to try to do something different? And I rolled those dice, and it's worked out so far.
I love it. So let me, and I want to get into the connection to culture and your approach. Before I go there, though, I think it's important because, and you said it, and I think it's really important to highlight. There's a lot of people that are probably feeling that apathy, that experience right now
Yeah.
in their workplace.
Yeah.
And for our audience who's, in the HR, talent development, even management roles, they have to train them. They have to inspire them. They have to engage them. They have to motivate them. And, we'll probably dig into this deeper as we get into the questions on connection or anything else. But I want you to go back. If you were you
Hmm.
And thank you for sharing that story and your
Of course.
experiences vulnerably and openly. I appreciate that a lot. If you were you back in that time and somebody was putting you into a training program and you were the audience in that training program, is there something that maybe would have landed for you? Is there something that somebody could have done that would have maybe snapped you out of it for a minute? Because when we're in that apathetic state or when we're in the, forget all this and this doesn't matter and not feeling like in tune with
Yeah.
ourselves, we tend to shut off learning. We tend to shut off, we tend to be cynical about everything. Oh, great, another training experience.
Hmm.
There's a lot of people that are experiencing that right now. And I know that there's a lot of trainers and coaches dealing with that in the audience. What might have aligned with you? What would have landed with you? What would have got your attention if you were to go back to that space and imagine yourself in the audience?
Jay, that is, believe it or not, that's a question I think about a lot because um, if I'm being completely transparent and honest with you, if someone were to have handed me my book in my 20s, I wouldn't have read it.
Yeah,
Just being
sure.
honest, I wouldn't have read it
There's a lot of things that now Jay Johnson would look back at Jay Johnson and be like, if you would only listen to
yeah,
this,
yeah, and
Kyle, I
that's the
feel it.
rub. That's the
Yeah.
rub. That's the rub in my business today is, and I can't convince people. I can just share
Mhm.
experiences and stories. But if I were able to convince people, it would be to convince them that there is a better way. There is a better way. I The reason why, so to answer your question directly, is there something that would have resonated or kind of snapped me into gear? The short answer is no. I'm
Yeah.
not proud of that answer, but it's the truth. And it's no because I was a product of my environment. I led in a way that I saw others lead. And that in those days was a very different approach to leadership today. I'm happy to say that. But there's this cycle that happens in almost every organization. And I'll boil it down to the most simplest of scenarios. Let's just say I'm on a team of 10 and my boss gets promoted. And now my boss is responsible for choosing their backfill. So I apply, I go through the interview process. There's something inherent inside of us that says, I need to endear myself to this person making this hiring decision. Well, what's the best way to do that? Well, I should behave similar to them. So
Mhm.
I'm going to start to take on the same characteristics and leadership traits that I loathed in them because I think it will endear me to them to get me this job. And if it works, what do you think I'm going to do next? The same bad behavior. I'm going to continue to. So that's what I did. And there were a couple leaders, I should call them bosses, throughout my kind of growth and kind of coming up in the corporate world that I'm very grateful for having worked with, but I'm not grateful for the leadership style that I don't want to say instilled because that
Imbued
implies that I had
almost.
no responsibility in it. I had responsibility in it,
Sure.
clearly. But I'm grateful for those opportunities and working with them because it taught me how to get stuff done. But
Mhm.
it didn't tell me or show me the way to get it done that inspired people to want to do it, to continue to want to do it, to reach for more, to do better, to not settle. So that's the short answer is no. And the rub for me today in my work today is trying to get people to understand that the way that you see things today doesn't necessarily mean it's the way that it has to be forever. It requires making a choice. It requires some self-reflection. It requires doing things that you may not have been comfortable doing historically. And for me, I was not open to those things because, as I mentioned, I was quote unquote successful. I
Mhm.
was every 18 months, 24 months, I would find myself in bigger and bigger roles. So why change that recipe? It's
Yep.
hard to refute that until the benefit of age and wisdom. I have a lot of age and a little bit of wisdom to say that there's a better way. And I think if we're going to work as much as we all work, it needs to be the most impactful work we can make and have.
Yeah. When you're talking about that driver or that measure of success and the way that we end up measuring success in a lot of organizations is bottom line or promotion or quote unquote winning. And a lot of the work that I do is on our biological drives. And while that satisfies our drive to acquire, it misses out on a lot of other things, such as our drive to learn, our drive to bond, and our drive to defend. And I think that's where we're
Fascinating.
going next is the drive to connect and bond with each other. So it seems to me, and correct me if I'm speaking out of turn. It seems to me that as you went through this stage of sort of navigating how you're feeling in this environment, how you're feeling about yourself, how you're feeling about your role, and not
Yeah.
feeling fulfilled, it seems to me that it was almost a longing for deeper connection and or relationships with people. Can you talk about that a little bit?
First of all, the premise of the question is so enlightening to me because you essentially described me. I checked those boxes and was not able to connect those that you closed with the question, with the connection and how it makes me feel. But by the way, you wouldn't catch me having a conversation about feelings
Sure.
the first dozen or 2 decades.
Kyle, I'm a former junior hockey player and mixed martial artist, a competitive debater, and excessively driven to win. I feel you, and I've had to
Brother.
learn the other side to feel more connected.
Okay, so let me turn it back to you. Was that a conscious shift for you? Was there an epiphany? Was there a moment that you said, "This ain't it. I've got to. I need to find a different path"?
Yeah, it really was. And I'm almost betting that we're very similar on this. For me, research was about me search. I was trying to figure out why do I keep finding myself in the same
Yes.
positions, making the same bad decisions, doing the same
Yes.
things, alienating people, and so on
Yeah.
and so forth. So,
Yeah.
when I say I empathize, I authentically, in this case, recognize and see a lot of that. And that's why I really appreciate you being able to kind of communicate this because this is something that I find to be really valuable. The
Yeah.
turning
It's
point
important.
is one
Yeah.
bad decision where it was just like, what am I doing? Why do I keep doing
What, bad
this?
how?
What are
Bad
these
how, Jay?
patterns? What's that?
Bad
Oh,
how? In what way
usually
was it? Yeah.
Usually it was the destruction of some kind of relationship. And
Mm,
not, I don't mean like partners, I don't mean like a spousal or anything else like that. I mean
sure.
like business relationship,
Yeah.
friend relationship, colleague, coworker, or whatever
Oh,
else. And it was just like, and part of it is my drive to win. It was win at the cost of pretty much anything. And
yeah.
it really served me well when I was in hockey. It really served me well when I was in mixed martial arts, but it wasn't serving me well in my happiness or my gratitude for life or the relationships that I was building around me.
What do you think you missed out on as a result?
It's interesting. I don't I will say, and I want to pose that question to you too, because I find it to be a really interesting question. I believe that every single thing that I had gone through, every experience has led me to kind of break through to where I'm at today.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think that absent those experiences, I might still be doing the same thing. So I don't want to, I don't particularly look at it as what did I miss out on? When I was in that position and when I started to make that decision to study behavioral science, it was what am I missing out on in the future? And it really
Huh.
was a future forward of how can I fix this in moving forward? I didn't really look back as much. Don't get me wrong, I reflected on the patterns of behaviors, but it wasn't a question of, okay, I'm going to lament and regret and do all of these other things for a history that is lost. It was much more about, hey, I'm a young enough person that I can figure this
Yeah.
out. I feel like I'm smart enough. I feel like I've got enough energy to do so. What
Hmm.
does my future look like? And that's really it. Do you feel like, from your perspective, do you feel like there was things that were missed, or is it, was it something that was motivational behind that for you?
Clearly, for me, the thing missed was connection. And I
Okay.
don't mean to speak in nebular terms. Here's what I mean. On one hand, I can count the number of connections, people that I can pick up the phone right now and call and say, "Hey, I want to bounce an idea off you." On one hand, or less than one hand, I could count the number of people that would fit that category from the first 20 years of my career. The last decade, I still have one-on-ones with people I haven't worked with in 5, 6, 7 years.
That's awesome.
Right. And I just shared that as a commentary because I think it illustrates the point of what I missed out on. And that is those connections that are not just means to an end. They're
Mhm.
genuine bonds. I genuinely care about you and your success and how I might be able to help that. And in turn, I hope that you might have some nuggets of wisdom to drop on me occasionally, or at least tell me that I'm full of it. someone that I can call and say,
Right.
Kyle, they'll break it down for me. So connection, I think, is the primary loss for me, because I'm still able to deliver, um, I think, incredibly strong results. It's just how I get there is a very, very different approach than years past.
Okay. Now, and that makes sense. I think, from the connection side, I'm very fortunate that I have had people who have been with me from early on and
Hmm.
continued on my journey.
Hmm.
Partially because in my efforts to win, I also do have sort of an undying, and this is what I've had to more cultivate, an undying loyalty to team. And I'm gonna credit my hockey days for that. Is like, nope, team first. I'll step back or whatever else as
Yeah.
long as we're winning. So I,
Yeah.
I had that, and I demonstrated that loyalty, but not without impact sometimes of like, hey. Um, I was a tyrant in some cases. I
Yeah.
was why
Yeah.
are you not working 16 hours a day? I can
Right.
work 16
Yep.
hours a day. What the
Yep.
hell's wrong with you?
Yep.
And in sort of that experience, I found myself just being angry and frustrated and damaging some of that trust and things like
Mhm.
that. But it was always one of those where they knew I had their back, but I could still be a real asshole, if
Well
that makes
said.
sense.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Well
So
said. Yeah, we,
let's
we,
talk
we,
about
we
connection. Go ahead. Go ahead.
well,
I
I was just
didn't
going
mean
to
to cut you
say
off
the
there. Yeah.
similarities in the way that you express, your path, that there's a strong overlap there. And I don't at all claim myself or proclaim to be any type of behavioral expert the way that you are. So hearing you describe it and the way you articulate it is very different than the way I would have. But it resonates in such a way that I see the overlap.
Mm.
I think it's really powerful. So I'm grateful. I'm grateful for you breaking it down that way. Sincerely.
I'm grateful to have a friend that's experienced some of the things. This
Yeah.
is amazing. So, all right, let's talk about connection because you've created systems and obviously installed that when you had taken that role, 11
Mhm.
days after you had left corporate to really kind of create connection, meaning, and impact, and have even written a book about it, which I'm always impressed with any author. I've been writing a book for 10 years and, I'm still on,
It's not
page
fun.
whatever, but
Yeah.
that's a journey for another story. But you took this sort of like internal desire, maybe this lack, maybe this gap, and you turned it into something beautiful that's helped, organizations shift. Let's talk about that. What in that hunt for connection, what did that look like for you?
For me, it was a genuine epiphany. So I took the role and I allowed 30, maybe 60 days to elapse. And, I was at least aware enough to know that I needed this team more than they needed me. For some context, the fellow that had the role before me, I think, was dismissed, and I believe the woman before him might have also been let go. So they had seen people come and go in this role. And it's probably worth noting, my direct reports, they had an average tenure of about 12 years. So they had forgotten more about their roles than I knew because I was new. But it was clear to me also that of my 7 or 8, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 direct reports who managed really large functions, hundreds, if not thousands of people, there was not there was not a real sense of team. Not that they didn't care about each other, but it was, if one group was winning and another group was not, quote unquote, winning, the winning side, the winning team did not recognize that on the macro we were not winning. If a group inside of this team is not winning, then we're not winning as a group.
Siloed
So
scarcity.
yeah, right, exactly. So it was probably 45, 60 days into the role. I asked for the top 45 or 60 leaders of this 15,000 person organization to come together. And it would be my chance to kind of share my expectations of the team. But I also wanted to be really clear these would be their expectations of me, which is an approach that I had never considered. My ego wouldn't allow me to take that approach. So, Jay, the night before I was to be on stage in front of this group of leaders, I was freaking terrified. I was in my hotel room. I had no idea what I was going to say. I just knew the recipe of old was not the recipe I wanted to bring to this organization because I took the role understanding that I could lead in a different way. And I was asked to lead a transformation.
Hmm.
So it was probably around midnight that night that I'd started. We had a dinner earlier in the evening, and I was still wearing that day's suit. I had my laptop open. I said, I got to put some slides together. And this epiphany that hit me was this is your chance. You're leading a massive organization. If you want to have the impact that you brought, the desire to have an impact that you brought with you 30 years ago or 20 something years ago, now's the time. You've gotten the green light. You've been told this is in need, but how are you going to do it? So then I just started to replay both really positive scenarios, but also those scenarios that left me feeling less than whole, feeling as if I was just kind of a means to an end or I was a transaction for my boss is. And I'm not a super creative person. So I just started typing and an hour or two elapsed and I'm staring at my laptop with 10 sentences. That's it. And each of them at the time and still do begin with the word we. And these were going to be, I called them our guiding principles. I had 10 sentences that began with we. So I called them the 10 we's. These are our guiding principles. I didn't even know what the definition of a principle technically was. But I shared them with the team the next morning and I opened up with, I don't care what our clients think. I don't care about anything other than what's happening behind this curtain. Because it was obvious to me that this organization does a really fine job of orienting the new hire into the fold, right? Here's your job. Here's what you do. Here are the X's and O's, the SOPs. Like here's this goes before that. Very, very, I thought sophisticated on the training and learning side of things. But there was not guidelines or expectations, very clear expectations set for behavior, how we treat one another behind the curtain. And I was convinced that if we could be high functioning behind the curtain and really, really be a team, lean into this concept of we, which hit me the night before, the results would come, but we would do it in a way that recognizes each other's contributions. We would care for one another and we would collectively win, not just individual silos. And it worked. I shared the 10 We's the next morning and fast forward a handful of years later, those principles, they've made their way into that company's performance evaluations. They have the 10 We awards. They created all kinds of swag. I still wear my 10 We's bracelet from many, 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 many years ago. And and I think the reason why it took off so quickly there is there was a recognition that we know our business. We're really good at the fundamentals of our business, but no one's ever said, "Hey, we're going to pick each other up. We're going to own our mistakes.
Mhm.
We're going to say what we're going to do, and then we do it. We're going to these 10 principles. No one has ever been that explicit. We got these values on a wall that no one can recite, but no one has been explicit enough to say, first of all, hey, boss, this is how we're going to hold you accountable. And I remember like it was yesterday. I literally said, if you guys see me behaving contrary to any one of these principles, I want you to grab me by the ear and say, dude, you're being a hypocrite. I said it just like that. Some did, some didn't. But that was the beginning of a very different leadership approach for me. And by the way, parenthetically, 5 years later, there were members of that team that reached out to me. I was with another firm already that reached out to say, when's your book coming? And I
Mm.
said, I'm not writing a book. What are you talking about? I'm not an author. He said, you are okay. You're the guy that said, this is who you are. You changed this $7 billion program. Do you have something more in you? Is there more for you? They thought I had more in me. And it was that reason why I started to write the book because other people had changed their existence in terms of their ability to be a good teammate, a good leader. But then I started to hear stories about how it was changing how they behave outside of work. And I thought this is where I have to go. And now it's my purpose to continue to evangelize these principles, the 10 We's.
We're going to get into that, but I want to go back to something that you said, and thank you for sharing that. What I'm looking at here is I'm imagining Kyle sitting in the hotel room in the day before his business suit, and you're sitting there and you're looking at blank page syndrome. You're trying to hack out what it is that you're going to talk about, and I got to imagine that some level of temptation starts to creep back in because you're recently fresh off of your other 11 days or whatever it was from your previous.
Mhm.
And on some level, there had to be the temptation of, well, this worked really well for me 30 years ago.
Yeah.
How did you temper that temptation? Because a lot's on the line, a lot at stake. And one of the things that human beings tend to do when there is a high risk calculation or anything else is go back to whatever they've survived on before. I mean, that's a natural part of the
Yep.
way that our
Yep.
brain is constructed. So you had to feel a little bit of that temptation. What was the tipping point to say, no, I'm not going to go back
Love
into
it.
that pattern of behavior?
Love this question. The tension or the potential of sliding back into that approach didn't happen immediately. I would say half the room was really excited and optimistic. I would say a quarter was kind of cautiously optimistic. There was a quarter-ish that were obstinate. They're just like, this guy's full of it. It's never
Never
going to
going to
work.
work. This is
Never going to work.
BS. This is
Yep.
all emotions. This is, yeah,
Yep.
all the
One guy
things.
accused me of plagiarizing. He asked for my presentation because he wanted to check the file properties to see if I created the PowerPoint. We've become great buddies since then, but yeah, he admitted to that. The 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 I was tempted to backslide, and I think it's probably a fair way of describing it, when my adoption of my own principles was tested. And there was a scenario that I remember like it was yesterday. So one of the principles, we number 8, is we challenge each other. The following principle is we embrace challenge. My temptation to use my business card instead of the principles that I had documented and subscribed to and was evangelizing came when I was challenged. A woman on the team,
When
brilliant
you
woman.
when you say use your business card, I'm
Yeah,
assuming and presuming that it's like, no, I'm the boss. Now just get your ass
because I
down.
said so,
Right. Yeah.
right?
Okay.
Because I said
Gotcha.
so.
Just
This is
wanted to make sure. Yep.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Because I said so. This is not a democracy. I'm the leader, and this is the decision I'm making, which is not, I wouldn't say it quite that way, but that's
Sure.
kind of how I led. So there's a woman on the team who led a group of about, I would say, maybe 300 people ish. And she was responsible for all of our contract work, which is a really big role. She was, she's a brilliant woman. I was still learning. I said, hey, Julia, she knows I tell this story. Hey, Julia, can you send me the XYZ workbook? Because I want to dig into some of the Excel workbook, because I want to dig into some of the formulas, because I'm a data nerd. If I can dive in and see how this affects that, I would be smarter for my little bit of homework. And Julia sent me a screenshot. Well, if you ever use Excel, you know a screenshot is not super helpful because you can't follow references. You don't know how things are calculated. So I said, Julia, maybe it was a mistake. Julia, can you just send me the workbook, please? I need the whole workbook. I want to check references, different tabs, and so on. She sends me a workbook now, but it only has one tab in it. Didn't have the other tabs that were referencing data elsewhere. And this is the point that I so vividly recall saying, all right, dude, your principles are one thing, the standards that you've established are one thing, but now you got someone who's being obstinate and they're just being a jerk for being a jerk's sake for whatever reason. And I think this moment, this scenario had such an outsized impact on my and unexpected impact on my ability for these principles to take hold because as you know, I was being watched. And am I the guy evangelizing these principles and kind of preaching them, but not living them, creating this leadership gap, which I have seen all too many times. We've all seen all too many times. And I'm just one of those guys at this point. Or am I going to take my own medicine? For whatever reason, I took my own medicine and I just continued to kind of coddle in some ways. Julia, please, this is what I need. I didn't react the way I wanted to. I think it's worth sharing. She is one of those people that I still have regular one-on-ones with multiple years later. Although at the time, and she'll say this out loud, we did not see eye to eye. We didn't like each other. But now she's one of my closest confidants that I just cherish that relationship. But that was the sentinel moment. I realized you can't just talk about it. As a matter of fact, nobody cares what you say.
Yep.
They're watching you. They care how you act. They'll follow your behavior, not what you say. And that was a real pivotal moment in my journey because I used to lead with ego, and now I was leading with a more kind of empathetic approach. Why was she challenging me in the way that she was? Why was she being difficult? Well, because she had been burned by people in my position previously. I came to find. So that was the biggest moment for me. And there are certainly other instances, probably less impactful, that I learned to respond rather than react is probably the best way I would describe it.
I love how you framed that because And every single human being goes through this process of where we have a thought, we have a feeling, and we have a choice to make. And that's literally from a behavioral, that's why I studied behavior and not something else, was my core philosophy is our behavior is the only choice that we have. You're going to have feelings, you're going to have thoughts. More than likely, in that moment, Julia was obstinate, and there was that sort of thought process of like, why is this person doing this? Or,
Yes.
and all of those
Yes.
other feelings that come with it, frustration, anger, etc. But you made a choice, and it's in those choices that drives our success and failure. And I love that the 10 We's are the sort of guiding North Star light to how you're making choices. So I don't want to pay lip service to them, but I know that we don't have that much time to maybe go through all of them.
Okay.
So I'm going to encourage our audience to buy your book, take a look at it, but let's talk about it. So this connection piece, this starting with we, not even necessarily with why, but starting with we, we're all in this together.
Mhm.
What is, as you navigated these principles, what are some of the things that you started to see in terms of outcomes when people said,
Yeah.
hey, we got to this we space? What did you see in that organizational shift?
Yeah. So the first thing, so I have to admit, the first several months after introducing them, there was a fair amount of fear that I was being pandered to. Like, the more senior you are, the funnier your jokes somehow are. The more
Sure.
time people want to spend, right? That's just how it works. So I was a little concerned there was some, brown nosing, frankly, going on. Um, so I didn't push them, and I told the team, I said, I don't care if these 10 become 11 or become 8 or 7, but this is what you can expect from me. I hope you follow along with me, and we all adopt these principles. This is the standard that I'm going to hold myself accountable to. And I'm gonna hold you similarly, but you don't have to subscribe to them. Just know that these are the things. These are our standards. I started to see signage pop up. So we had lots of locations around the country. I started to see signage. That was, again, not quite convinced it wasn't pandering to the new guy, but where it really became palpable and profound, and I'll use the same example of we number 8, we challenge each other, is staff meetings, which are historically in most organizations, most environments, they're readouts. The boss sits at the end of the table. We go around the table, people giving their KPI updates or whatever's going on in their world. We break and we move on. Well, when you say that challenge is not an option, it's an obligation, but it has to be done diplomatically and it needs to have an element of data or experience. That's the rule. It's not your opinion. My staff meetings started to turn into conversations where Lori would be on one end of the table and she would go through her readout. Julia would hear something that didn't quite pass her sniff test because she's been with the organization a long time. She knows people that knows people and that know people, and she knows this business. So now she's obligated to say, "Well, hang on a second, Lori. In a meeting yesterday, so and so said this," or you pick the scenario. But my point is we have conversations now. It's not just readouts. And what I would do occasionally, so in an organization this size, you have to pick your battles. You have to pick where you spend your time, and hopefully you pick the right paths, the right avenues. But there were times, admittedly, I would dial in to a call. This is way before COVID, so video wasn't as prominent. It's almost all voice, teleconference. I would dial in and not announce myself.
Hmm.
And what was so heartwarming and really profound, and that's when I knew the brown nosing was less of a thing and it was more authentic, was I would hear people say, "Well, listen, hey, we challenge each other, right?" And then they would bring up a contrary point. And someone would say, "Well, yeah, well, we embrace challenge," or, "Hey, we do the right thing." So before we land on an answer or a solution here, the problem we're trying to solve, let's not forget we do the right thing, right, guys? So I would hear it played back in vernacular, and it became part of our DNA, man. And it was something that you couldn't go more than probably 20 minutes in any meeting without someone interjecting one of the principles as kind of our true North Star. This is how we're going to behave because we've
Yep.
all subscribed to that. So for me, seeing it was one thing, but hearing it, especially when I wasn't in the room technically, was probably the most impactful moment where I realized something bigger than me is happening here, and we got to embrace this.
Well, and I think one of the things that it seems to me, and again, without having been there, but it seems to me one of the things that you did was you normalized a language around a value system and a structured value system, that North Star. Because I think that's where a lot of organizations fail in developing their cultures. They have these high level
Yes.
values, purpose, meaning
Preach.
that literally does not translate into a short slogan of "we embrace challenge." That I can remember. I can't remember what it is
Well
if it's
said.
just like we organize ourselves so that way we bring innovation at every turn and do this in order to facilitate the best customer relation. Who gives a shit? We embrace
That's
challenge,
it, brother.
right?
That's
So
it.
it sounds to me like you really developed a language that was around. You had mentioned it became a part of the vernacular, but when we do that, that's really what cements it. If I can communicate it, then it's real. If I can't explain it, what does that mean?
Man, again, you have described my work in a way better than I do. You're right. I've never looked at it as normalizing dialogue or normalizing our communication, but that's exactly what happened. And your connection to, so I worked for a company that I'll leave the name of the company out. The mission statement was helping consumers on their paths to better health. Beautiful. No one's going to disagree that I want to be a part of that.
Clean.
Perfect, right?
Yep.
Except it doesn't compel me to work a bit harder. It doesn't compel me to work any more collaboratively. It doesn't compel me to focus on outcomes over activity. That's what the principles do. They enable those to your point, they enable those lofty statements, most of which people cannot even recite. They enable them in a way that is actionable. And it's a currency almost. It's a currency that no matter if you're the newest intern or the most tenured leader on the program, you have the ability, not just the ability, you're obligated to spend that currency. And your observation's spot on. It created normal words and phrases and dialogue that you wouldn't have heard otherwise because we made the choice to use them as part of our being, of who we are.
That was kind of you to say. If
True.
it's something that I've believed for a long time and we see it backed up by science. If it's easy, people will do it. If it's hard, they're going to try to find an easier pathway. You
Can I
made a very complex concept of values and identity inside of an organization super easy, manageable, and something that everybody can say, hey, yeah, if we all buy into this 10 We's, that's going to create an environment that I'd like to work in.
Yep.
So,
Yep. Yep. But Jay,
brilliant.
can I challenge something you just said, man?
Sure.
I I I would love to swap out your use of the word easy for simple.
Sure. I'll
Is
accept
that
that.
fair?
Yeah,
Because I think I'm the first to admit the principles are incredibly simple, but they're not easy because
that's fair.
of the conversation we just had, right? It's
Yep.
easy to when things are good, man. It's easy to say, yeah, we do the right thing. We challenge each other. We it's that's easy. It's when things are tough,
To live it is a different question.
they're
Yeah.
still simple,
Yep.
but it's not easy. So that's the only
No,
thing I would
I
say I would not disagree, but just maybe amend if you're okay with it.
100%. I think that's a great amendment and probably more in line with what I meant than what I said. So thank
Okay.
you for that. Yeah.
Sure.
So, Kyle, in the event that let's kind of fast forward and just for a time's sake here, and I would love to have you back because I think that there's a number of
Count
things that
me
I
in.
would love to go deeper in.
Likewise.
Fast forward, we've implemented this, and I want to go back to the origin story. We've implemented this. You said eventually you had moved on to a different firm, etc. How were you feeling? Because there had to be some level of that gap that you experienced when you were in the corporate side of things to where all of a sudden you've made this transition, you've started to see things differently, and now you've emerged from the other side of the hero's journey, the story, the whatever else. You've come out changed. How did that feel for you?
Changed my life, Jay.
Yeah.
Changed my life. Um, it started as a change exclusively in my work world. But then I realized so it's one thing to say that these are the standards that you hold yourself accountable to in the workplace. And it's another thing to say, and if I don't live these in front of you guys or you see me behaving contrary to them, call me a hypocrite. But I wasn't, for many years, I was not carrying those same standards and principles to my personal life. And there was an epiphany moment there as well where I realized, Okay, you're not being a hypocrite in the workplace, but a hypocrite's still a hypocrite. So if you're not committed to doing the right thing, and it's a silly example, but I caught myself leaving the shopping cart in the parking spot next to me instead of returning it to the little corral thing or back to the grocery store. I'm pulling away and I see my grocery cart in the rear view. It's like a movie. I'm pulling away and I can see the grocery cart slowly rolling backwards. And I go, "You hypocrite. You." So I whipped my truck into a parking spot and took it back. And I've never left a grocery cart not where it belongs ever since then. But the change my life part comes when I realize when we set a series of standards, I don't care if it's one. Ideally, it's more than that. But as a human being, when we set a series of standards that we're going to hold ourselves accountable to, we'll stumble. We won't get it right all the time. But how do you achieve? How do you reach goals? How are you exceptional in anything without establishing the standards of your behavior that are required to achieve that excellence? It's almost nonsensical to me, but I never looked at it that way. My work Kyle and the out of work Kyle were two different beings. I just happened to spend a lot more time on the work side, so it was the predominant character that you would meet. But I am just so vehemently convinced now that the more authentic we are in the workplace, in other words, we're not that different from inside to outside of work. I get it. There are decorum things and we can't, foul language and things. But the more authentic I can be inside, outside of work, and everywhere in between, the more trustworthy I am, and the more naturally and loyally fellowship will arrive. So it changed my life. And there was one final moment, and then I'll just shut up and listen. Is I gave a talk at Audi. It's been well over a year now. We're at the Q&A portion of the talk, and this is what really hit home and was the final kind of straw for me to say, this is who you are, not just a work thing. Q&A at the end, fella stands up, raises his hand, stands up, big former Division I football player, bald head, Mr. Clean looking guy, really intimidating guy. I'm like, oh shit, where's he going? He thinks I'm full of it. He says in front of a group of like 70 executives at Audi, he says, this book changed my life. Love hearing that. He said, but maybe not for the reasons you think. These principles have changed how I'm raising my children. Dude, I teared up. I teared up in front of 70 strangers. There was a stool behind the podium at which delivered part of my speech. I just sat back on the stool and I said, I got nothing, you guys. I think my work here is done. And that was a really powerful, important moment to me because it realized we set our own ceilings as well. And I set out on this mission to change the workplace, and it's now created this momentum that I'm seeing and hearing from readers that it's having similar impacts in their personal lives, which is just fuel to me, man. It keeps me going. Um, and when I say it changed my life, there's no hyperbole there. It absolutely has changed my life.
It's incredibly powerful. And thank you for sharing that, Kyle. It's really interesting. As you were talking about that sort of like being that authentic person in the workspace, it really aligns with my crusade to end this concept of work-life balance or work-life integration. There is no two Kyles, there is no two Jays. You are a human being and you operate in different environments and contexts. And to try to put on, yes, there's behaviors or social
Yeah.
expectations in different places, but you're not a different person walking into those spaces.
Why do we have two different vocabularies? Unless you go home at the end of a long day and say, hey, honey, how'd you do on your deliverables today?
I think we could probably get into the science of code switching and the purpose behind it, but we might be in a long
Our
conversation.
next, our next gather, you and I will do this again, hopefully.
Well, I would love to do this again and actually dig into the 10 weeks because I think this is a really powerful conversation and really insightful. If you're that trainer, if you're that coach and you're sitting there and you're wondering, hey, why are things not necessarily easy for me in this L&D space right now or in this talent management space? Really be thinking about that question of connection. And I think that Kyle, you just did such an incredible job setting that standard of a North Star of we need to be connected before we're actually going to be fulfilled, happy, or whether or not that check mark of acquisition is going to actually have meaning in our lives. So I want to say thank you for that.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Kyle, if our audience wanted to get in touch with you, how would they reach out to you?
So I'm on essentially every social media platform with the handle at Kyle McDowell Inc. My website is kylemcdowellinc.com as well. The book is Begin with We. It's available wherever books are sold. It seems like Amazon's probably the easiest place to get it. But listen, man, anytime I get an opportunity to share these experiences, and I never want to come across that it's about me, because it's not. These principles have taken on a life of their own, and I'm just a steward, kind of helping spread that word. And meeting folks like you and having conversations like this is the perfect way to do it. So I'm eternally grateful. Thank you.
We're grateful for having you on the show, and thank you, Kyle. I'll look forward to our future conversations. And
Likewise.
thank you, audience, for tuning into this episode of the Talent Forge, where we are shaping the future of training and development.